Can I build a 20-0 Cleveland Browns team from all the players in franchise history over the years? We'll find out.
You are Locked On Browns, your daily Cleveland Browns podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, Dog Pound? I'm Spencer German, your host of the Locked On Browns podcast, and proudly covering your Cleveland Browns each and every single day in the land and on the road, both here at Locked On and at BrownsRoundtable.com. Today's episode is brought to you by Odoo. Great organizations win because operations matter, and that's why you should get Odoo. Try for free today at odoo.com/lockedon. That's odoo.com/lockedon. I tried to build a 20-0 Cleveland Browns team, and I think I'm calling BS on this game because I couldn't get one. I'll reveal what did happen for me. Also, I'll try to actually make some tweaks and put together a 20-0 roster. Plus, does young equal bad in the NFL? We'll get to all those things coming up. But I start with my experiment playing the 20and0.com game that is sweeping the nation. I know this really started with 82-0 with the NBA and people trying to build an undefeated basketball team. And then since then, it spiraled into people doing like a baseball version with 162-0, a football version with 20-0 and winning the Super Bowl if you were to make that type of run, and all those different things. And so I had some fun with this. I did way too many of these trying to get 20-0, and I could not get a 20-0 team, believe it or not, despite my best efforts. These were the three best. There was a couple other versions of this team that were 17-3. I'm throwing them up on the screen here. I'll read through them for those of you on the listening audience. But you can see the graphic here of the three different versions that I picked. And I sort of picked these because there was variance between all three of them. There was one that was 17-3. I got 17-3 quite a bit. There was one I got that was 18-2. This was really the only version of the team that I got that was 18-2, and that was the best record I have. And there was a version that went 16-4. And the reason I'm calling BS is, listen, I thought some of these teams were going to be unstoppable. And then I was very much humbled by the game telling me that they'd only go, for example, 16-4. Or 17-3. It was just kind of not fun from that standpoint. But I'm going to try to make an actual 20-0 Browns roster based off these parameters here in a second. The way the game works, by the way, you don't pick offensive linemen. You pick one defense, well, technically two defensive linemen because you get an edge rusher, but there's no offensive lineman involved in this. So using these parameters, I think I came up with a roster that will be 20-0. But let's go through these versions that I created first. So the 16-4 team, the worst one that I built. Baker Mayfield was my quarterback. I got the Browns from 2020 to 2025 or whatever the hell it was. I got Nick Chubb. And again, for those who are unfamiliar with the game, you click spin and it spins a wheel and it gives you a Browns team, because I made sure it was just the Browns. It was a Browns team and then a different era of Browns football. So, for example, some of these I got Jim Brown. It gave me 1959 and 1965 or whatever. So I then had a chance to pick Jim Brown because it fell into that category. So it's kind of like a roll of the dice. You get a couple re-rolls, and I did generally use the re-roll, at least in both instances, for both the offense and the defense. But the 16-4 team, Baker Mayfield was my quarterback. Nick Chubb in 2022, which was his best season, was my running back, and it was Mayfield from 2020, his best season. Josh Gordon's best season, or I guess this was actually this was Josh Gordon's best season from 2013. I was in that range to get him. I got Kellen Winslow as my tight end. I was in the 06 to 2010 Cleveland Browns window. I got Kellen Moore when he had over 1,000 yards receiving. Amari Cooper was one of my flexes on offense, his best season in 2022. And then Braylon Edwards, not his best season in 2005, but a 512 reception season, 3 touchdowns he had. And it was the offense in this instance that held me back because on this 16-4 team, believe it or not, my defense actually had like 100 grade overall. That's how good it was. But my offense was held back, and I think Braylon Edwards and a little bit of Baker Mayfield, because Baker Mayfield I realized held me back a couple times, were the things that held me back the most. My defense for the 16-4 team was Myles Garrett in 2025 as the edge, Bob Gain, a throwback to 1959. I had him with his 7-sack season, and I thought that was going to maybe help me with the defense being put over the top, and it did. DeQuell Jackson was my top linebacker. I had Joe Hayden as my top corner. TJ Ward was my safety from 2010, and also was Joe Hayden from 2010 and DeQuell Jackson from 2011. And then Andre Davis, 2003, was my other flex. You got 2 flexes on defense is the way that the game works. So that defense netted me a 100 grade overall when I put this together. So that tells you just how good the defense was, but the offensive side of it, not quite as good, and I only got 16-4. My 17-3 team, so this was a slight improvement. Baker Mayfield, still my quarterback. I had Jim Brown from 1963. I had Amari Cooper from 2022 again. I had Gary Barnidge this time as my tight end. His best season in 2015. I had Braylon Edwards in his best season in 2007, and I had Josh Gordon in 2013. That offense feels very much like a juggernaut. I thought it was going to be one that certainly put me over the top. That one came in with an overall score of 97, so I was pretty darn close, but it told me that Baker Mayfield held me back. Once again, Baker Mayfield holding us back. The defense in this instance was Myles Garrett from 2025. I got him in all the best versions. I got Myles Garrett in 2025 in his best season. Sheldon Richardson getting reunited with his old friend at defensive tackle was my D tackle. Carson Schlesinger, I got the most recent window of the Browns a couple times in this version, and so I picked Carson Schlesinger as my top linebacker. Denzel Ward in 2018, so his rookie season, was my top corner. And then I got TJ Ward at safety from 2013. And then my last flex was Jadeveon Clowney, from 2021, his best season with the Browns, where he had 9 sacks, which I thought was going to help put my defense in a good spot. My defense was actually worse than my offense in this one, so I found that a little bit surprising as well. But still a pretty solid team overall, and that was the only version, by the way, where my offense was better than my defense. And then my 18-2 team, Baker Mayfield once again my quarterback. I continued to settle on anytime I got the Browns from 2020 to 2020. Or I guess it was 2016 to 2020, I think was the window, or 2015 to 2020, whatever it was. Anytime I got that window for the offense, I always picked Baker, because to me, he was the best quarterback this franchise has had since 1999, and I didn't know if I was going to land in a range to get Brian Sipe or Bernie Kosar, but I ended up going with Baker every time, and he held me back a couple times because he held me back on this team. Jim Brown was my top running back from 1963. Josh Gordon, my top receiver from 2013, obviously his incredible season. Kellen Winslow was my tight end yet again, his 2006 season where he had 875 yards and 3 touchdowns. Amari Cooper was my first flex with his best season in 2022. And then Jamal Lewis was my other flex from 2007, his 1,300-yard season. That's a pretty stacked offense. 2 really good running backs, 2 of the best in history probably. 2 really good receivers, a solid tight end, and it was Baker that they identified as the thing that held me back the most. And then defensively, this defense got a 98 score, so just below that 100 that it got for the 16-4 team. But Myles Garrett, Malik Collins, the 2 guys, I got the most recent version of the Browns twice. DeQuell Jackson, my top linebacker again. Denzel Ward, my top corner from his 2018 season yet again. TJ Ward, my safety yet again from 2013. And then Andre Davis was my other flex at linebacker. I kept getting that 2000 to 2006 or whatever it was Browns range, and that was a painful time to be a Browns fan. So those are how the team shook out. None of them were 20-0. And I started wondering about small tweaks I could make to any of these teams to put it over the top to be 20-0. As I had fun with this exercise. So I'll talk about a few of the tweaks that I think could have maybe changed some of these outcomes. But also, I'm going to build you my 20-0 team that I think actually makes the cut. If I could just sit there and draft guys from Browns history without the parameters of 7 to spin the wheel and give me a certain era. We'll get to that coming up next on the Locked On Browns podcast. Running a business shouldn't feel like you're trying to connect a bunch of systems that were never designed to work together. One app for accounting, another for inventory, another for sales, and somehow none of them seem to talk to each other. That's where Odoo comes in. Odoo is an all-in-one business management software that brings every part of your business together in one That's right, one powerful platform. From sales and accounting and inventory and marketing, everything works in one place, helping your team move faster, stay organized, and focus on growing your business instead of managing software. The best organizations know that success isn't just about talent, it's about having everyone working together for the same goal, and that's true in sports just like it is in business. And for example, the Cleveland Browns just traded Myles Garrett 2 weeks ago. That wasn't a decision that was just a reactionary move. They had a vision of what they wanted, they stuck to it, and they got Jared Verse back because everyone was working off the same playbook. Get organized and win because operations matter. That's why you should get Odoo. Try it for free at odoo.com/lockedon. That's odoo.com/lockedon. All right, so I couldn't get a 20-0 team in the 20-0.com game. I tried. I gave you some of my best versions, my best outcomes of what the teams looked like and how I sort of assembled them. So I'm going to make some tweaks to those based off the rosters that I had. But then also, I'm going to try to build you like a legitimate 20-0 team with the same parameters that the game calls for. So I'm not drafting offensive linemen here. It's just on offense, like those skill positions, and on defense, one from sort of each level, and then the two flex positions, or the one flex position, I should say, because I guess I said there was two. It was actually one because you got a safety in there. So we'll go through this exercise and continue to have some fun with it. And then I want to know from you, like, did I miss anybody? Was there anybody that you would have drafted from some of those eras and maybe done differently? Have you made a 20-0 team yourself on the 20-0 game? I'm curious all your input as well. Real quick, just a reminder about the Everydayer Club, your chance to get Locked On Browns totally ad-free wherever you get your podcasts and at the Locked On Browns YouTube channel. You will find it there as well. You get access to a members-only Discord channel where you can interact with myself and other hosts from around the network. Just head to lockedonbrowns.supercast.com. The link is in the show notes to sign up and learn more. So the first thing that I wondered was whether or not landing on the era of like Bernie Kosar, so like the early 90s to 95 when the team was, disbanded for a stretch there. If Bernie Kosar would have put me over the top to end up getting the 20-0 team that I had hoped, or if same thing applies here, Brian Sipe was the quarterback that maybe would have put me over the top to have a 20-0 team with this version of this exercise. Who obviously Brian Sipe had some of the best years in Cleveland. He is the franchise's leading passer for single season yards. He's the overall team franchise leading passer with the number of yards that he racked up over the years. So I kind of wondered if that would be the first change that I would make to some of these if I landed in those eras of those decades. Like that would have helped me on I think two different versions of this team, because I felt like Baker was maybe the thing holding back the 18-2 team, it said, and it also held me back in the 17-3 team. Maybe that quarterback change would have put my offense over the top. So I wondered about that first. On the 17-3 team, I also sort of wondered if instead of Sheldon Richardson, if I had ended up with Malik Collins, for example, a more recent one, obviously, or maybe if I would have ended up with one of the old school, like Bob Gain, who I mentioned, if that would have maybe helped put me over the top, or if I could have actually selected like Michael Dean Perry from the 80s to the early 90s, late 80s to the early 90s, if that would have helped me put it over the top with the defensive tackle position, because I felt like that was maybe the weak spot of the 17-3 team. Because like otherwise, like Denzel Ward, or maybe if I had Joe Hayden in his prime, or Denzel later in his career, if that would have maybe tipped the scales. Because I really didn't think that Jadeveon Clowney as my flex thing was all that bad. I thought that was actually, for being one of his better seasons and certainly his best in Cleveland, I felt like that was a good pick as an extra sort of flex player. And then the defense on the 16-4 team was 100. So I was, there's nothing good to complain about there. That was probably the most like on track team, except the offense just, I guess, fell short. Getting Nick Chubb, I didn't think was going to be all that drastic of a, it wasn't going to hurt me all that much when it was his best season. But maybe if I had gotten Jim Brown instead, for that one, it would have tipped the scales a little bit. Braylon Edwards during his 07 season instead of his 05 season maybe would have helped me out. And the 18-2 team, is the one where I'm like, I'm regretting like certain things. I'm going back and like sort of playing through my head, like who could I have taken at different spots if I can remember all the spins. But I played so many rounds of this, I can't honestly keep track. But that was the one where I wanted the most. Like it flat out told me that Baker Mayfield held me back, and so I wondered if maybe that would have been the one where you get Bernie Kosar or you get Brian Sipe, if it puts you over the top with that 18-2 team to be 20-0. Because again, the defense was pretty damn good, unless maybe I would have swapped potentially instead of DeQuell Jackson. Maybe I get Carson Schlesinger, or you keep. Maybe I would have got DeQuell Jackson and ended up with like Carson Schlesinger instead of Andre Davis in that example, and maybe that would have put it in my favor. I don't know. These are all, when you play this game, it's why it's so addicting. You have like so much regret about like, oh, I was so close, or oh, if I had just done this different, like maybe I would have had a different outcome, and then you just keep playing and playing and playing. I thought this was a fun exercise. I was trying to have some fun with it, and I went down a rabbit hole that I didn't expect to and stayed up way later than I should have trying to map this out. So, yeah, those are some of the changes I think could have been made to these direct teams. But I'll tell you, this exercise, the goal here was to build a 20-0 team. And so that sort of spiraled into, if I go back through Browns history and I can select anybody, I don't have the spinny wheel to tell me what era or what Browns teams or what players I have at my disposal. I can just pick anyone. How do I build a 20-0 Browns team? What does it look like? What players am I choosing? And so I use the same parameters of the game to build out this 20-0 team here. And this is what I think would get me to 20-0. Quarterback. I'm going away from Baker because he held me back so many times in the game. Brian Sipe. I'm going with Brian Sipe. I could have gone with Bernie as well, but Brian Sipe put up better numbers in his career than Bernie did. Had the 4,000-yard passing season at one point, which is the most in franchise history. I felt like maybe that would be a change that would help the cause. So I'm going with Brian Sipe. Running back is staying Jim Brown. Obviously, had picked him a number of times throughout the game on some of these teams. Jim Brown is arguably the greatest player in franchise history, if not NFL history. He's up there for being one of the best of all time. Like, that guy deserves to be on here. He's my running back. Wide receiver, this is also a no-brainer. Josh Gordon in that 2013 season where he just went bonkers. He is absolutely on the list. He is the number one wide receiver on this team. Tight end, I went with Ozzie Newsome. I never had a chance to draft Ozzie. The spinny wheel never fell in the era of Ozzie Newsome, which was pretty disappointing, to be honest with you, because I would have taken him in a heartbeat. But Ozzie Newsome is my tight end. And then my two flexes on offense are Amari Cooper as my second wide receiver. And then my other flex I put as Nick Chubb, my other running back there that I have as kind of a backup. And that one's tough because the other flex on the offense, you get two, that's where you get the two flexes is an offense, is hard because like you can go with a tight end, you can go with another wide receiver, you can go with another running back. In this instance, I went with another running back thinking Nick Chubb would maybe tip the scales. I if there's a way to plug this in and just see what would happen, I would do it in the game. I don't think I can do that. But I felt like that was a pretty good offense with all the skill positions covered to go 20-0. Now maybe I'd be better off going with another tight end in today's day and age of passing offenses, because then you have more weapons for Brian Sipe to throw to rather than another running back. But I like the idea of Nick Chubb there. And then my defense has to start with Myles Garrett, of course, at the edge. His 2025 season, his best season of his career. I got Michael Dean Perry, as I mentioned earlier, defensive tackle, one of the all-time greats in Browns history. My linebacker, I went with Clay Matthews. I was torn, and I wanted to kind of go with Carson Schlesinger, but I felt like the game maybe doesn't value Carson Schlesinger as much because he was a rookie this past year. And so I went with Clay Matthews. I went with Denzel Ward as my corner, although there's an argument, obviously, for Joe Hayden, and even some others probably over the course of history. My safety, I went with Eric Turner, a throwback there. Never had a chance to draft Eric Turner either, which was disappointing because he would have been probably my top safety pick, or one of my top safety picks for sure. And then at my flex, I went with Jerry Shirk. Spent the 1970 through 1981 seasons with the Cleveland Browns. He had 70.5 sacks in his career, was the NFL Defensive Player of the Year in 1976. And I just felt like you get yourself a pass rusher to go opposite of Myles Garrett. I want to know the parameters of this game and like what it's measuring, how it's deciding what teams go 20-0, because I think Shirk would get me there, But I also thought like Jadeveon Clowney in that one season he had opposite of Myles Garrett would be enough because Jadeveon Clowney was a damn good player. So I don't know. I'm curious how they kind of calculate all this, because I had a hard time getting to 20-0. But that team that I put together, I think maybe puts you over the top. Where I'll read it to you one more time. We have Baker Mayfield, or sorry, don't have Baker Mayfield. Brian Slipp at quarterback, Jim Brown at running back, Josh Gordon at wide receiver, Ozzie Newsome as a tight end, Amari Cooper and Nick Chubb as flexes. My defense, Myles Garrett at D end, Michael Dean Perry at D tackle, Clay Matthews at linebacker, Denzel Ward at corner, Eric Turner at safety, and Jerry Shirk as my flex. Does that team of all former Browns players get us to 20-0? Would you swap somebody out? Let me know in the comments on the Locked On Browns YouTube channel, or hit me up on X at Spencito_. I had some fun with this. I'm sure you've had fun playing the game as well. When we come back, though, does young mean bad in terms of the Browns' potential outcome in 2026? We'll talk about that coming up next on the Locked On Browns podcast. If you watch the NHL playoffs, you know that every shift mattered, every moment was intense, and everything came down to execution when the pressure was at its highest. And just like athletes must be ready to perform when the puck drops, a lot of guys just want the same sense of readiness and confidence in their own lives too. That's where Rugiet comes in. Rugiet offers modern performance-focused treatments designed to help you be ready when it matters. Their top option, Rugiet Ready, is an fast-acting, clinically formulated treatment that comes in a single mint that dissolves under your tongue. It's designed for confidence with fast absorption and effects that can begin in about 15 minutes and last up to 36 hours. They also offer Go Long, which is formulated to support both performance and control for longer lasting needs. It's all about helping guys feel prepared, confident, and in control. And a lot of it comes down to confidence for you. When you're not worried about whether things will work when they need to, it just lets you stay focused and in the moment. Head to Rugiet.com/LockedOnNHL to get 15% off your ED treatment. That's RUGIET.com/LockedOnNHL for 15% off. Rugiet, performance medicine for men. All right, so on the heels of talking about the 20-0 Browns roster, I got to thinking about this upcoming Browns roster and how many games they could potentially win, and then being a younger team and what that kind of looks like, and some of the younger guys that I went through the 20-0 game with, hoping that they would sort of set me over the top to be 20-0, and there's certainly a lot of young talent on this roster right now. But one thing I've talked about in previewing this upcoming season is the fact that a lot of times young teams, you kind of go into the season thinking, well, hey, there's going to be some growing pains. And I do stand by that. But I think it's interesting that Andrew Berry, in some of his recent appearances, speaking to the media, has kind of jumped. He has continued to preach this idea that just because the Browns have a young team, and before the Myles Garrett trade, I know there was a graphic made that had them as the fourth youngest team on average going into next season. That might have changed a little bit with Myles now out of the picture because he was 30. So, but with even with him in the picture initially, the Browns were the fourth youngest team in the NFL. And I think in general, Barry is right that young doesn't have to equal bad. And there's some evidence that backs this up. Seattle was the sixth youngest team last year, and they obviously went on and won the Super Bowl. 6 of the top 10 youngest teams in football in the NFL last year were in the playoffs last year. The Packers were the youngest. I know the Patriots were in there. The Jags were in there. So there was a number of teams that you would consider young that made the playoffs last year, including the champions, the Seahawks. In 2024, the Packers were the youngest team again. The Eagles were the 6th youngest team in 2024. Apparently, you want to be the 6th youngest team, and that's where you have the most success because the Eagles won the Super Bowl in 2024. The Chiefs were 4th that year. Obviously, they made the Super Bowl. In 2023, it was the Packers again. In 2022, it was the Browns were the youngest team. That was back when the Browns were sort of at the very beginning of their run with Baker and company and Kevin Stefanski, and they had just made the playoffs a couple years prior. Or actually, I guess 2022, they would have had Deshaun Watson at that point. But so they were still among the youngest teams back then. 2021, the Jets were the youngest team, and people thought they were kind of turning a corner at that point in time, and obviously it didn't happen. 2019, the Dolphins were the youngest team. 2018, the Bengals were the youngest team. In 2017, the Browns were the youngest team again. In 2017, that makes a lot of sense because that was the year they stripped it all down and went 0-16 and were just a bad football team in general, but it started sort of them building towards what they became. So there's kind of some evidence that suggests both. There can be really young teams that are bad, i.e. the 2017 Browns, and that just don't have a lot of talent. And there can be really young teams that have sort of this perfect collection of talent with guys that have veteran experience. And a lot of this obviously comes down to quarterback play too, because think about Sam Darnold, for example, with Seattle, who had him, several years into his career in a couple different spots not working out, becoming this quarterback that then leads an offense that can go off and win the Super Bowl. But it's helped where you have like young talents like Jackson Smith and Jigba there, and among others like Charbonnet and obviously Kenneth Walker was there until this offseason. So those things certainly help, but you kind of need this perfect storm of young guys that have some years of experience under their belt, but also the right quarterback and a guy that can play at a consistent level, and still be a young team that has young talent, not just young to be young, because the 2017 Browns, for example, were just young to be young because they were tanking. But young does mean inexperience, and that is the biggest thing that matters to me as I think about sort of the outlook of this upcoming season is, yes, you can be good and be young, but you also need, you can't be so young that your team just doesn't have any real world experience in the NFL. And so that's why, for me, I think we should be anticipating the Browns having some growing pains this year. We should anticipate that there's going to be some mental mistakes that cost the Browns some games here or there at key moments of games. I think Todd Monken can mitigate some of that by just the way that he coaches. He's holding guys accountable at practice. We've seen that. He gets things corrected out on the practice field. He's not letting things continue in practice or moving ahead before a certain play he wants run a certain way gets corrected or gets fixed. But listen, the Browns have 6 projected starters on offense. That's including Shador if he starts at quarterback, and 4 projected starters on defense who are all in their first 3 years of their careers. So Jared Verse falls into that category because this is year 3 for him. Like this is just it's an inexperienced group, and that's the thing too is I talk about the inexperience factor. Jared Verse is younger, but he has more real world experience. He's been to the playoffs. He's seen what winning sort of looks like. And he's accomplished some things in the early stages of his career. Somebody like Spencer Fano, somebody like Casey Concepcion, somebody like Denzel Boston, who I don't know that Denzel was part of the 6 that I counted in terms of like the offensive starters. But like those guys, they don't have that yet. Even last year's young team, like what has Carson Schlesinger won Defensive Rookie of the Year? So that's one example. But like, what has Shador Sanders done to this point? Like there's and they weren't in a lot of games at times where like you couldn't learn from certain things. There were some moments they could learn from. It was just there's just a lot that this team still has to sort of do and grow and develop. And I don't know that it's all going to come together quickly enough for this team to be like a good young team just yet. There's still a lot of new. There's still a lot of young. And so it doesn't have to mean that they're going to be bad, and there certainly is some evidence to suggest that you can be young and good, as I laid out. And so maybe the data will prove me wrong here. But I don't necessarily think in year 1 of this with Todd Monken, and it's also, by the way, it's not just that the Browns are young, it's also there's a lot of new. Offensive line is all new, the coaching staff is all new, defensive court, not everybody obviously, but like the main bigger roles, the defensive coordinator, the offensive coordinator, the head coach, and the special teams coordinator are all new. There's going to be a lot of growing pains for everybody to sort of iron out and get through. So I'm just not at a point where I feel like I can say the Browns are going to be young good. They need some more experience under their belts first before they get there. And the Seahawks, by the way, kind of had that. Guys like Jackson Smith and Jigba were part of seasons that weren't didn't end in Super Bowls. The Browns have to get to that point first and build some more experience and get some growth going with some of these guys before they're at a point where I feel like they can be young, competitive, young playoff team, young championship contender. So they'll get there, but I don't know that's going to happen this year overnight. So is Andrew Berry wrong? No. You can be young and still be a good football team. I just don't know that this version of the Browns right now, with so much young, so much new, is going to be a good young football team just yet, which is why I said 7 wins. Myles Garrett got traded. I say 6 wins. If you like what you heard, hit that subscribe button. Make Locked On Browns your first listen every day wherever you get your podcast and at the Locked On Browns YouTube channel. If you never miss an episode, the Everydayer Club is built for you. Chance to get the show ad-free on whatever audio platform you prefer, plus access to a members-only Discord channel. Just head to lockedonbrowns.supercast.com or check out the link in the show notes to learn more. You can also check out my friends at Locked On Cavs or Locked On Guardians. Thank you for being every day at the Locked On Podcast Network. Go play 20-0 yourself. See if you can get a 20-0 Browns team. And let me know what you think about my away from the game 20-0 Browns team I made, where I could just pick anybody I wanted. Did you like it? Did you not? Let me know, and I'll catch you next time, Cleveland.